Hello. In this video I'm going to talk to you about editing vector shapes and different ways that you can change and edit what you're looking at in Illustrator and in InDesign. And I'm going to start off in Illustrator. I'm going to show you how to modify your shapes. I've got a few different artboards with copies of the same object on it, just in case you're wondering what you're looking at here. And these are just regular vector shapes that have been drawn using the shape tools. So the rectangle, the ellipse, the polygon tools for these. Okay, so now what are you looking at in terms of the structure of the object? Okay, so you know it has a fill and it can have an outlying stroke, but the objects themselves are made up of vector pathways. So formula pathways. And then each of these paths have a couple of items which help define the shape that you're looking at. So in the case of the rectangle, it's got 4 anchor points. These are the points where the straight lines are drawn between. So you can, using the direct select tool, select these and modify them, pull them around and change the shape. And between these 2 points, it's always going to be a straight line for a square or a rectangle when it's drawn using the shape tool. Ellipses and circles, these also have 4 anchors that are making them up, but this time the anchor is a curved anchor. This is where it can hold the Bezier toggles, the Bezier handles, and these are the items that give the curvature to this pathway that you're looking at here. So you can convert and modify these, you can select them, you can change them. The Bezier handles, you can move these around and change them. Bringing them further out will increase the curvature, bring them in will tighten the curvature at this point in relation to this point. Okay, you can convert these and change them back and forth. So if I wanted to turn this anchor point, I can select this object, use the direct select tool to pick up the anchor, and then I can modify that. So at the moment this is a corner point, and I can convert that to a smooth point so it gets a Bezier handle on it, and I can adjust that, move it around and adjust the curvature on that. Okay, so you can do that with any of these shapes. Likewise, if I wanted to make maybe something with pointed ends on it, I could start using an ellipse and then convert these to corner points using the convert command. Okay, and this works in a lot of different ways, so you can use this to make really interesting shapes. You can select more than one anchor point at a time using the rectangular marquee to drag over those anchor points, and then you can convert the two at the same time. You can select them and move them individually, so you can make some really unusual shapes that way with these. But it's important to understand that these anchor points are selectable for you so that you can modify and edit these shapes in a lot of different, very simple ways, but very interesting ways. So I can take the anchor points and then I can convert them. So I can convert a bunch of them at one time. Just be careful if you select over the entire object. It's not always going to give you those anchor points because you've actually selected this stroke as well. So you just need to be careful that you're selecting only those anchor points that you're looking to convert and change. What else can you change and modify with these objects? Okay, so you've seen the underlying structure for these. So the anchors, you can select the pathways themselves and shear those. So if you're looking to make kind of isometric type diagrams and so on, copying around your shapes, you can do that. You can pick up any of the pathways inside it. So with the direct select tool, you can either select the anchor or a pathway, and then you can modify those around. And again, as we've covered, holding the shift key will keep this constrained to a horizontal or a vertical movement. So it's an orthographic movement for that. And this can be really important when you're looking to mirror shapes and flip them around. So you can use the transform controls and so on. And I'll get to that a little bit later. Other things that you might want to do would be take away the anchor points. So you can again select those with the direct select tool. You can press delete on it, and what that's going to do is it's going to eliminate that point and not redraw or remap the stroke in between. So if you are looking to edit these, you also have the option of using the pen tool. So once you have the pen tool, you notice that it has the star symbol next to the cursor, and this means that it's starting in a blank space and that you are starting a new pathway with this. However, if you hover this over objects that you've already drawn, you'll notice that I get a plus symbol where there are no anchor points, and if I do have an anchor point, I will get the minus. So I could add in some extra points here and here, or I can take them away. And when you take those anchors away, it's going to shorten that part and redraw it. So you can use this to make really interesting shapes fairly fast, just by adding and subtracting some anchor points. Now, you want to have the object selected already. If I go over to one of these over here, you can see it's giving me the star symbol, the asterisk. And this is Illustrator thinking that I want to draw a new line. If I want to edit and modify this pathway, I need to have this pre-selected. So select it, go into the pen tool, and then I can go in and add in some more anchor points or take them away if I'm looking to make some kind of more sheared shapes and so on. Other things that you might consider looking at, if I just move over here, you're looking at maybe the strokes themselves. So not just the pathway, but the appearance of the thickness on this. And these are under the properties panel over here under stroke, or if you go up to window, you can bring out the expanded stroke menu. Now, Illustrator and many of the Adobe products like to hide a lot of the options that you might want to play around with initially. I suppose it's maybe to keep the interface a little bit cleaner, but we'll just go through some of these with you. So you have different stroke weights, so the appearance of thickness for this line, okay, and then you have different ways of how the end caps and corner caps are presented to you. So if I just draw a slightly wavy line here, so you can see this, and it has whatever settings that I have already set in the stroke panel. So this can be a neat way for you, instead of resetting all the same line thickness and stroke weights, you can preset some of these, and then when you start drawing with it, it will have those settings for you. So end caps, I need to increase that stroke massively so you can see this a little bit easier. So you have these butt caps at the moment. So what it's doing is at the very end of that stroke, the end is drawn for you exactly where that anchor lies. So you may want to have like a round end on this. You can change that over here. So it will give you a circular end on it. The radius of that is the distance and the weight for your stroke. In the same way, you can have a projected cap. So maybe you want to have a square end on it and you want it to be the same radius or the same distance from here to here. You can also change some other effects on these. So the appearance for what is being presented to you, you can change the alignment for these. So corners, again, I'll just increase the size so you can see that somewhat. So the appearance of the corners, whether it's a right angle, miter joint, a round joint, or a bevel. So you can change the appearance of these. Also, you can change the alignment for the stroke, for whether it's centered on the line, inside the line, or outside of the line. Now, sometimes if you're making very intricate rectangular patterns or polar patterns, the alignment for that stroke can be very important. So just bear that in mind later on when you are making some patterns using these. And other things that you might want to do to these would be changing the appearance of the line. So whether it's a dashed or a dotted line. So at the moment I've got a 1-point dash, and I'm just going to increase the weight on that so you can see it maybe a little bit better. And I have these very short dashes, and the gap is very long. Now, if I change that around and I change that to 15 points and 15 points, I'll get something like this. And likewise, I could make that much longer. You can do that, either you can type in directly into the input dialog, or you can pop your cursor in and just scroll your arrow up or down. So scrolling upwards will increase the number, make the dash longer. Scrolling down will make it shorter. Now, the interesting thing about this is that you can turn this into a dotted line. So if you're making perforations, you could change this down to 1 point. And then if I change the end caps on this to round, and then I can reset that down to 0 and have that a perfect circle. So I can make perforated or marks for perforation if you're doing packaging, or you're just looking to make dotted patterns on your object. Some other considerations up here. The alignment for this. So if you want to preserve exact lengths for the dots and dashes that you've specified, so I'm just going to swap this back to a number where we can see it a little bit easier. So you can see this is going to be exactly 15 points and 15 points gap, which doesn't exactly align up to our rectangle perfectly. So if you want to maintain a really nice appearance, what it will do is it will center these dashes on the corners and then use the spacing in between. So the corner size dash is not exactly 15 points in length. Okay. Other things that you can do with this, so apart from just changing the stroke weight and the joint on the end of it, the capping or the alignment of the stroke inside or outside, you can turn these into arrows as well. So if I just change this back a little bit smaller, down here you can turn these into some arrows. You can have an arrow on one end or two ends, and then again you can apply dashes and dots to that at the same time. You can also change how the stroke is appearing to you. So at the moment, just down here, you can see it's uniform, but you can change that and change these to non-uniform paths. So if you wanted it to have a bulge in the middle and tapering off on each end, you can do that. Likewise, if you wanted to turn this into like a triangular stroke, you may be making or drawing some hair or some spiky objects or some basic trees in the background of a place, you can use this to quickly draw those as well. And these don't have to be just applied to closed paths, so or open paths. They can be applied to closed paths too. So these ones are closed paths, they form a closed loop around on themselves, and this one doesn't, so it's an open path. And you can also apply non-uniform profiles to these as well. Just need to maybe increase its size a little bit so you can see that. Other things that you might want to have a look at with these would be some more kind of transform controls for these. So if I just pop this away, and as you're kind of familiar, you can right click and go into transform and, you know, do all the standard stuff, move, rotate, reflecting. You can reflect objects using the transform menu up here. So when you have this selected, you can choose where it's being reflected from, and then you just click on this. Now in InDesign, you can hold down the Alt key before you click on that and it will make a copy. Illustrator is not quite as friendly in that way. So what you'll need to do is maybe take a copy. So copy and then paste it in front of the same object that you've got, or paste it in place, and then you can reflect it. So mirror these from one plane to another. And you can reflect that in a number of different ways. So you can just change where the reference point is, and then you can flip it, so on. Okay. Other things that you can do to this, to these objects, would be looking at the corners and how the corners are presented to you. So you have here, you can see a live corner widget. So if I click and drag on this, so click, hold down, and if I bring it all the way into the center, I'm going to get a circle anywhere between the complete edge and going into the center, and these are going to have a small radius on it. So it's telling you how large or small that radius is. Now, You can also flip around those corners and change the shape. So if I'm just going to do that on this rectangle here. So I can bring this in, and while I hold down on the left mouse button and I'm changing the radius for this, if I use my arrow keys, I can flip this between 3 different corner types when it has a distance between the corner and the radius. So I can have a round corner like here. So when I pull this in, it's automatically going to be in a rounded corner, a fillet or a radius on it. I can have an inverted if I press it once, and if I press it twice, it will turn it into a bevel. So you can do kind of chamfers and bevels on your objects. This can be accessed in a few different ways. Now, Illustrator does a good job of hiding that, and it's under the transform menu. Okay, so you can change the corners individually. So if you didn't want all 4 corners to be a bevel and you wanted one to be rounded, once you have your object selected, you can change those corners here. And likewise, if you wanted to take away the radius on all of these, grab the live corner widget and drag it back out towards that edge, and then they will have a value of 0. Okay, you can of course modify these individually, so you can unlink them, and then when you click on this, you're going to be able to adjust a single one, so it's not going to affect all 4. And likewise, I can adjust them up or down. I can relink them, and then if I don't like it again, just drag it back out. Now this one's a larger value, so I just maybe need to input 0 into here and then bring that back to 0. Now these were drawn using the rectangle tool. These were drawn using the ellipse tool. So depending on what you have selected, the transform menu will change somewhat for you. Okay, so you can see when I have a rectangle, I have corner options. When I have an ellipse or a circle, I have options for cutting it open and making pie selections and so on. Where's the start and end for the shape? So I can cut open a section from this like so. You can make Pac-Man like shapes fairly quickly. If I have a polygon, I can adjust the number of corners on this, so the number of sides. I can quickly flip up around these. It will keep the center point from where it was drawn as the reference point. You'll notice that there's only a single live corner widget, which will affect all of the shapes, all of the corners on it. And I can again invert those and change them around. So if I'm looking to make kind of a more faceted 50p piece or something like that, I could do that fairly quickly. And if I want to eliminate the corner radius, again, just click and hold down the live corner widget or change the corner radius value to 0 here. Now, this is a rectangle, so this doesn't have those because it was drawn with the rectangle tool. The polygon tool can make squares, so if you are looking to make some interesting changes to these, you can make a 4-sided shape using the polygon tool as well. So you can use that and then make some adjustments and changes to it that way. You've also got up here the same transform controls to flip and rotate it around. You have up here in your properties, and you have the options for shearing and how it's rotated as well. So you can shear your object and so on. Some of these will be easier for you to access through the direct select tool, and then for you to manually select a part and just shear it yourself and so on. Okay, now that's access under the transform menu from the top. Okay, now there are some other things that you can do to vectors. So you have seen that you can edit the anchors, you can change the stroke, and then you can modify the number of corners on them and the corner edges and the radius on these. You can shear and reflect it around. Now there are some other kind of tools that you can use to make these, and they're just hiding under here. So you have the width tool, which allows you to change the effect of a stroke. So if I just draw a very nasty curved line there, let's delete that and draw that a little bit smoother, please. Okay, somewhat better. Okay, so I'm going to increase the stroke width on this, and you've seen that under the stroke properties that you can have non-uniform stroke and that you can have lots of different shapes. So you can have a bulge in and out, and go from tapering 0 to the bulge in the middle back to 0. Now, if you were drawing a shape and you wanted these to have a little bit more appearance, I'm just going to change them all to roughly the same kind of larger stroke size so you can see this a little bit easier. You might not want the stroke value to be so even across this. You might want to come down and use the width tool, and then you can add in a new width section at this point. So the width tool is very straightforward and easy. It's looking for you to select on the path, and then you can either add it in using the plus symbol, and you can modify it as you need be. So you can go back in and edit that. And this allows you to have non-uniform paths, and this works on whether it's an open curve or a closed curve. Just bear in mind that it's working between the anchor points, so it's tapering out and down to those anchor points. So if you want this to be much more even as it's flowing around the corner, just grab that anchor point and adjust that as well, so it will kind of flow between those. And it doesn't matter if it's a circle, ellipse. You can get some very interesting shapes by just using the width tool on these. And then under the width tool, you have a few different other options. So you have these warp tools: twirl, pucker, bloat, scallop, crystallize, and wrinkle. So I'm just going to show you a couple of these. The warp tool is really neat because you can use this to affect the shape of what you have selected. So if I have this one selected, I can use the warp tool, and then I can push it around. And this would be similar in a way to like the liquefy filter inside of Photoshop. So I can use this to modify and pull around my shape. It's affected right up to the edge of the object. So you can see as I start to push onto it, how close I am to the center of the object is how far I'm pushing on the object. So over here, I have it selected. You need to have the object selected first for this to take effect. So just select that, and you can see as I get closer to the center of the tool, it's having more and more effect on the object. So you can use this to take away a lot of symmetry and rigid geometry that you would have in your objects that you've got, and this might be a really nice way for you to kind of soften up some lines and make them look a bit more hand-drawn for your objects. Especially if you're making some patterns, you can use this to kind of push around your objects a little bit more. So that's the first one, the warp tool. Twirl tool, it's pretty cheesy kind of filter. It's going to spin this around and make some spiral-like shapes. I don't know if I would use that very often, to be honest. I don't think I've ever used it once. But it's there, so perhaps there's a very good use for it. Under the twirl tool, you have the pucker tool, and this is similar in a way to the warp tool, except it's going to pull it towards the center instead of pushing it away from it. And this affects anywhere that it touches. So if I have an object, so the area effect is the full size of that brush shape that you're seeing. If I bring this right out towards the edge, I can affect it more or less. So it starts to zip right in towards the center. And you can use this to kind of, maybe if you were making terrain maps and so on, you can pull those objects up. It's very, very sensitive, so you want to just use this with care. And then the other options, bloat, opposite. So you're going to push away, and this one affects right up to the edge. So you can use these in combination with each other to kind of soften and move around some shapes fairly quickly. And then under that, you have the scallop tool. It's going to do a number of different, let's come over to this part over here. It's going to do a number of different kind of puckers from that as well. And it affects, these tools at the moment affect completely both vertical and horizontal objects. Some of the other tools right down the bottom, like the wrinkle tool, the icon is giving you a little hint. These will only work on horizontal items, and what it's doing is it's adding in lots and lots of anchors onto your pathway so that you can possibly make it look like it's more hand-drawn as well. Again, it's not something that I would use very much. The bloat and warp tools, these are really neat ways of affecting your shapes and getting maybe some more edgy patterns on them. And then lastly, just to remind you, you have always got the Pathfinder tools for editing and modifying your shapes. So you have once you have more than one object selected, you're going to have the Pathfinder tools available to you in the properties menu, but you can also get these through the window menu at the top. And again, if all of the options aren't being shown to you, you can show those. And then copying objects, hold down the Alt key and then drag, or Option key on a Mac, and that will allow you to unify paths. So I could unify the border from these, the first one, and with the second one, this is a difference. So whichever object is on top is going to get cut out. So we'll just move this one away so you can just see it with two objects. Select those and then use the difference. So Boolean difference, and it's going to cut that object out. Third option, this one here, is going to go for an intersection, and it's going to give me this little piece here. And then the last one is an exclusion, where it's going to cut out this part and then give me the border around the outside. And in this case, it's not going to look like a huge amount has happened, but you can see if I give this some color that I've cut out this section in between. So you've always got the Boolean tools, so the pathfinding tools, to add and subtract these together. Okay, thank you.